Hey guys, what's going on? This is Dr. Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. And before we get into this video, I want to make sure that you guys understand that if you want to follow exactly what we're doing on both the YouTube live workouts that we're keeping some of them posted and a lot of the different things that I post on videos, make sure you hop on to Patreon where we're posting all of the workouts that we do both at the gym and also at our contracts. If you want to follow more volume parameters, which is a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, please go and join Train Heroic where we post the workouts that actually calculate total weekly volumes and daily volumes of what you're doing in the workouts. So try to go and support us there. And at the bare minimum, make sure you subscribe and write some comments on this video. So what I wanted to talk today is about different kinds of maxes. Now, this sounds interesting because most people think maxing is just going as heavy as you can. And in reality, that's only one portion of what maximum training actually consists of. So I want to dive into this today because I think it should help your training and also answer some questions, a few of which we had today on the YouTube Live that I thought were interesting and wanted to make sure that you guys understand all the different types of maxing so that you can make better selections in your training. The first type of max that we have to talk about, which everybody thinks, is absolute strength, which is entitled FMM. And that usually consists of around 110 to 115% of your total capacity. Sounds interesting, right? Because how can you lift more than your max? Well, what's interesting is that your absolute strength is not really dictated by what you can turn on. So a lot of times absolute strength is measured involuntary through electrical current. You put somebody into an electric chair like they used to execute people back in the day. Trust me when I'm telling you that sitting in the chair, throwing however many thousands of volts into their body, they're at maximal contraction and nearly tearing things off the bone. So a lot of times our maximal strength of what our muscle can truly put out is both in an isolated form, number one, and number two, it's put there as a governor to make sure that we cannot turn on as much as possible so that our body has a regulation to protect both the active tissue, which is the muscle, and the passive tissue, which are the ligaments, the tendons, and the cartilage and the bone in some instances. So what's interesting is that absolute strength, although sounds amazing and it sounds like an amazing term, it's not really usable without external devices such as getting your ass shocked by electrical current, right? But the reason that we talk about absolute strength is because there's something called a strength deficit. The strength deficit is what we have in a gap from what we can contract ourselves versus what can be contracted involuntarily. This leads us into the next type of training, which I want to get into, which is competitive force maximums. And the interesting thing about competitive force maximums and absolute is that when most people talk absolute strength, they're actually talking about competitive maximums, right? We don't care how strong a quadricep is from an electrical shock. We care how strong, say, a quadricep is in a squat or a deadlift in conjunction with utilizing other muscle tissue. But what I find is interesting is that top level competitors, such as myself in my prime and many others, have a very close to absolute strength to competitive maximum. Why is that? Well, our firing frequencies are good. We have gamma motor neuron advantages, meaning that we're able to actually turn off certain inhibitive factors into your training. We also have proprioception, meaning we can control both the agonist and antagonist muscles better. So you find that high-level athletes tend to be very close in their strength deficit from competitive maximum to absolute strength. But for most of you guys watching this video, you're 10 or 15% stronger sitting here right now. It's other factors that are governing your body that are not allowing you to see that strength, which may take many years of training for you to truly realize. So all of this can be affected by positively training and long term. And what's interesting about these types of effects in advanced training is much of this training is neurological. So much of the effect of working out, as much as we would like to think that, everything working out, if we listen to Dr. Mike Israetel or a lot of these other bodybuilding style training, is that everything is revolving around muscle mass. Well, the difference between absolute strength and competitive strength, about 95% of the difference is neurological factors. right? Being able to fire the muscles at the right time, being able to control both the agonist and antagonist muscle group, being able to turn off the governors as our passive tissue increases its ability to withstand more pressure. A lot of these things take many, many years, and actually, in some ways, are more important than contraction themselves. But let's go into the different type of strength, which is competitive max. This is CFM. Now, I kind of categorize CFM as about 95% or above. And the reason is that this is the absolute max one can voluntarily lift. Now, competition force maximums are really good. And if you really want to know how many times you should be doing real competitive force maximums, which are true 1RMs, come on to Patreon and we'll talk about it, because it's not going to be as many times in a yearly cycle or training log than you think it would be, even though we talk about max effort work constantly. But this type of maximum, although needed for baseline and percentages-based training, right? Like, we need to know what our 100% is if we're going to do 85% for a set of 3. Or we may need to know what 100% is if we're basing our speed work at 30, 40, maybe 50% of our 1RM. So for sometimes we need a consistent number if we're going to base our stuff on percentages. But there is a huge downside to this. The one is that I like to switch into RPE training, rate of perceived exertion, and I'll tell you why. So we know from writings from Vladimir Zatsiorsky in 1995 that competitive force maximums can vary about 10% plus or minus 2% per day. Now, this has to do with nutritional factors, sleep factors, stress factors, previous training factors. There's a lot of different things, right? We had a bad day. We had a good day. We had, the right temperature. There's all kinds of shit. We warmed up correctly using Wenning warm-ups. That could be another factor as well, which changes our plasticity of our muscle tissue. But if we know that this fluctuates 10% a day, then it's really difficult in a long-term training scheme to base all of our training off of percentages. So what we like to do at Wenning Strength is we'll base our percentages training if we're getting ready to develop a competition force maximum. This means that we only use percentage-based training about 10, 12 weeks a year, maybe upwards of 15 weeks a year, depending on our yearly cycle, if we got people going to nationals, whatever that may be. The point is that when we switch over to percentage-based training, when we do so, we basically switch over, and it doesn't matter how we feel, that's the numbers that we have to hit. I find that in a long-term yearly or multi-year cycle, that using rate of perceived exertion is much better due to this fluctuation of about 10% of strength. But there's a bad side to competition force maximums. One, anything over 95% is very hard to recover from. Our workouts need no more than about 72 hours to recover so that we can go focus on a different form of strength, i.e. speed strength, or the dynamic effort method. If we truly go to 100% maximum, we may not be ready in 3 days to hit a dynamic day. And so what we start looking at is the depletion of the CNS, including nervous system and emotional stress. So I find that anything over 95 to close to 100% usually causes these areas to be a huge problem, especially when you start compounding them over multiple weeks. Hint, you don't ever see me truly max in the gym. So the big thing is that what I think you need to understand is that CFM, although needed, is not needed nearly as much as what you may think. A lot of people get on, say, like the YouTube Live, and they see me training, and they're like, put more weight on the bar, or they don't understand the full year process and understanding that competition force maximums should only happen on a very minute basis in a yearly plan. Okay, so the competition force maximum, although it's what most people think, or absolute strength is what most people think because we've been sold intensity, in reality, the last training method that we're going to talk about today is obviously the most important. These are called training force maximums, or what we like to use as TFM. TFM is usually about 90% or a 9 RPE. So if you're on the workouts on Patreon, you'll notice when we go heavy, I say 9 RPE. So we can have that 10% adjustment that we know in the advanced literature exists. The key is, and like I talked about a little bit before, is ever notice when you guys are watching my training videos that I post that I never fail unless I'm doing failure sets with isolated movements for weaknesses. But compound movements, I usually pick a weight and I never fail. Or I'll pick a rep range, like a 3-rep max or a 5-rep max. I never fail. And the reason for that is I think that it's very important to save at least one set in the tank. I actually learned this from a long-time, 10-time international champion, unbeaten from I want to say about 71 to 1981, Larry Pacifico. And he said that he saved all of his maxes for competitions only. This is an interesting topic because with the advent of social media, YouTube, TikTok, we see people maxing on a constant basis in the gym, when in reality, we should be asking ourselves, are they testing or are they maxing? Or are they training or are they maxing? They're very different types of workouts that elicit much different responses. So what I like to make sure is that I'm training about 80% of the year and only competing about 20% of the year roughly. But I find that 9 RPE is totally recoverable in a 72-hour period, leading to a much higher monthly and yearly volume. So if I'm in this for the long haul, which I hope most of you guys are as well, going to 90% is going to elicit just about the same amount of gains as going more than that. But the beat down from it is much less, allowing me to recover myself in 3 days and focus on a different form of strength. Remember that although we might be power lifters, or we might be Olympic lifters, we might be different types of resistance trained athletes, the big thing is that we need to be able to sustain one big thing, and that's consistency. So if I know I do a workout and I can recover from it and then 3 days later attack the same muscle group with actually positive results, it's going to be a much better factor than laying it all on the table in one workout. This allows us to develop other strength qualities such as speed strength, strength speed, and all these special strengths that Louis Simmons used to talk about a lot, which is also built into the dynamic effort method. This means that we're going to move submaximal weights at maximum intent or maximum as fast as we can. I think a lot of that's mixed up. So let's review. We have absolute strength, which is what you cannot attain. It has to be done most of the times externally. We have competitive force maximums, which are usually over 95% or a 9.5 RPE. These are amazing at developing strength, but they're highly neurologically taxing. This means that they're hard to recover from and means they can't be in the training very often. Then we have training maximums, which are close to competition force maximums, but roughly around 10% less. They're totally recoverable and they're totally usable in a weekly process. This is where we want to stay about 85% or so of the year to make sure that we're making constant progression. So I hope that if you're watching this, this makes a better sense of how to actually train, and make sure that you understand when you're talking maximal strength, there are 3 different kinds, and make sure you know what those are. But the stronger you get, the closer your absolute strength will be to your competitive strength, which is called your strength deficit. So this is Dr. Matt Wenning at wenningstrength.com. I hope this video has helped you out tremendously. Come and look at us at wenningstrength.com if you need online coaching, manuals, or you want to look at what we're doing at the gym, and we can show that to you on Patreon. Talk to you guys later.